Now, since we've been focusing solely on bass players so far in this series, I thought it was high time that we took a closer look at some of the incredible builders and bass makers out there. And where better to begin and to kick things off with the man who started it all, the legend Leo Fender. Now, it's no exaggeration to say that Leo's influence on the course of rock and roll and popular music is almost immeasurable. He rewrote the rulebook when it came to manufacturing electric guitars, and having sold Fender to CBS in the mid-60s, he went on to create some pretty iconic instruments for both Musicman and G&L. But for me, his greatest contribution came in late 1951 with the introduction of the legendary, the amazing Fender Precision Bass. But here's the catch: despite his guitars and basses literally rocking the world, Leo couldn't play a single note. Want to know more? Let's get into it. Leo was born in a small suburb of LA on the 10th of August 1909, not far from where Disneyland, California is today. He wasn't a guitarist, but he wasn't entirely uninterested in music either, taking piano lessons and learning to play the saxophone during school. During his early teens, Leo developed a keen interest in electronics, and before long, he was even building his own radio sets. Graduating from Fullerton Junior College in 1928 with a major in accounting, he spent the next 10 years in various bookkeeping jobs before setting up his own company, the Fender Radio Service, in 1938. Now, when World War II broke out, factories turned their attention towards supporting the war effort, which meant old parts for making radios were plentiful, and Leo's new radio business boomed. In 1940, he moved into a bigger premises, and the shop became a magnet for local musicians, with Leo branching out into repairs for lap steel guitars, PA equipment, and for amplifiers. But if you think about it, things could have been very different had Leo been drafted into the armed forces. Now, as fate would have it, he'd actually lost his eye when he was 8 years old, and having lived with a glass eye ever since, he was actually spared the call-up on medical grounds. Now, by the late 1940s, Leo had formed the K&F Manufacturing Corporation, together with a local lap steel player named Doc Kaufman. In 1950, he revolutionized guitar building forever with the Fender Esquire and Broadcaster guitars. The Telecaster followed suit in 1951, and in 1954, Leo launched the iconic Fender Stratocaster. In this interview, swing guitar player Bill Carson remembers the early days of working with Leo.
But he was such a clever man, and he was very plodding and relentless as a thinker, but once you could get your ideas across to him, he could make it. I couldn't make it, and he could, whatever it was that I wanted. And so he made me my guitar, and later on another instrument was needed in the line, and they decided to put that one in the line, and then it became the Stratocaster after that.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and I think he probably gave more to the music business than any other person that I know of.
Leo soon turned his attention to the bass, and while he didn't exactly invent the electric bass, a guy actually called Paul Tutmark from Seattle is credited with that, Leo definitely set the benchmark with his patent for the Fender Precision, which was introduced in the summer of 1951. Now, Leo made some minor changes to the P-Bass in 1954, contouring to the body and introducing a two-tone sunburst finish, but it was really in 1957 that some really fundamental changes took place, all of which defined the look of the P-Bass for decades to come. Here's Paul Gagan of G&L in conversation with Bob Wagner of the Music Store Live.
He was a big fan of bringing other people in it because, you know, it wasn't like Leo was a killer bass player or guitar player. He was just a genius inventor.
Right.
But he relied heavily on the opinions of other people.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people speak to that is a big reason as to why he was as successful as he was, is because he really took to heart and mind the feedback that he got from the most respected players. You know, you put out a new instrument and then, you know, listen to what the pro guys that were using it out there had to say about it, and that would lead to different refinements, which would ultimately always lead to a better product and a better instrument that people would just grow to enjoy more and more.
Leo redesigned the headstock, upgraded the pickguard, and did away with the chrome control panel as well. And he also added a new split coil pickup that had a more solid bass sound as well. The likes of Monk Montgomery with Lionel Hampton and Shifty Henry and James Johnson with the Treniers were quick to endorse Leo's new bass. Here's Jimmy Johnson with the Treniers in a clip taken from the 1956 musical Don't Knock the Rock.
Get on Thursday, rockin' on Friday, the house will rock from now till Sunday night.
Photos also reveal the P-bass in the live bands of Jerry Lee Lewis and B.B. King, and when Elvis Presley's bass player Bill Black was reluctant to make the switch from his double bass, Elvis grabbed a P-bass himself and played it on the final version of You're So Square on his 1957 album Jailhouse Rock. In fact, Elvis was still playing the same bass 8 years later when the Beatles showed up. Here's a quote directly from George Harrison. "So we piled into the house, and there on the couch is Elvis Presley playing a Fender bass plugged into an amplifier, watching TV. Carol Kay was another exponent of the P-bass, playing on countless sessions in LA for the likes of Stevie Wonder, Ike and Tina Turner, the Monkees, and of course, the Beach Boys' iconic Good Vibrations. As the bassist for Booker T and the MGs throughout the 1960s, Duck Dunn played on some of the finest soul records ever released. And let's not forget Tamla Motown legend James Jamerson. Jamerson had started out on the upright bass and was initially a little reluctant to make the switch to the Leo's P-bass, but he was eventually persuaded to buy a black refinished 57 Precision from his old friend Horace Ruth in 1960, and the rest is history. Jamerson 57 P-bass was sadly stolen, but he eventually got a brand new 1962 model in Sunburst with a tortoiseshell guard, and it was this bass, nicknamed the Funk Machine, that was used to record more hit singles than any other bass in history. Get Ready, Ain't Too Proud to Beg, You Can't Hurry Love, For Once in My Life, This Old Heart of Mine, Bernadette, and Going to a Go-Go. Here's a killing clip of Jamerson playing his 62 Precision playing on Marvin Gaye's What's Going On.
Oh, what's going on? What's going on? Hey, what's going on? Tell me what's going on. Ooh.
The Fender bass went on to become the generic term to describe all basses, regardless of the manufacturer. But by January 1960, having cornered the market with the P-bass, Leo was ready to unveil a brand new model. You've got it, the Fender Jazz. Here's a quote directly from Leo to guitar historian Tom Wheeler. "Well, it's like a car, you know. You come out with the standard model, and then you have a deluxe model, a Cadillac version." The jazz bass, so called in an attempt to encourage upright jazz players to make the switch to an electric bass, was introduced in 1960, prompted by the introduction of the Fender Jazzmaster guitar. Leo's new deluxe bass design was immortalised by the likes of Aston family man Barrett, Geddy Lee, Marcus Miller, and of course, you've got it, Jaco Pastorius. Check out this monstrous solo by Jaco, recorded at Stradhalle Offenbach, Germany, September 29, 1978. That was when I was born. Now, the earliest jazz basses appeared in March 1960, priced at a whopping $279.50 for the standard Sunburst finish. Now, that was $50 more than the Precision and offered a completely different feel with a narrower neck and closer string spacing. The Jazz also featured two single coil pickups wired in sequence with a pair of dual concentric stack knobs that control volume and tone for each pickup. But that setup was dropped by early 1962 in favour of a volume for each pickup and a single tone control. Here's a wicked clip of Geddy Lee recounting the day he bought his first Fender Jazz bass.
I was in Kalamazoo, Michigan. It was a boring day off. Then we were just out on the street, you know, bumming around, killing time. And we went into a pawn shop. And I wasn't one of those pawn shop guys. I never went to pawn shops. But one of the guys I was with, I think it was one of the guys in the crew, loved to go to pawn shops, so I went with him. I was surprised when we plugged it in how easily I could shape the top end to sound like a Ricky top end. But I was getting a different kind of shape in the bottom end. I was getting a bit more punch. And I ended up using it on Tom Sawyer, which many people to this day don't realize is a Fender bass, not a Rickenbacker bass. So that sort of began my curiosity about my number one.
The Jazz went on to become the go-to instrument for so many bass players. John Entwistle of The Who was an early endorser, as was Noel Redding with the Jimi Hendrix Band. Bob Dylan was also famously pictured with a jazz bass shortly after going electric in 1965. Rick Danko from Dylan's backing band also used one, and even the Beatles used one on Abbey Road in 1969. Larry Graham was slapping the strings of his jazz bass in the late 60s with Sly and the Family Stone, and by the end of the decade, the jazz bass was well and truly established as yet another classic Fender design. As Aston family man Barrett once put it, it's the weight and treble master. By the end of 1964, Leo had begun work on another bass model, the Fender Mustang. With its short 30-inch scale, it was the perfect companion to the Mustang guitar. Here's Justin Meldal Johnson introducing his signature Mustang bass, modeled after his '66 Daphne Blue Mustang.
This Mustang feels like an extension of your body on stage. This thing has balls, and it's got punch, and it's got this slice to it that's really particular. It's got a voice that is like a laser-guided missile going through the mix.
But it wasn't all plain sailing for Leo. A self-confessed workaholic, he had already lost most of his hearing while repairing a broken speaker cabinet in the early 50s. And by 1964, he was ill and exhausted. A year later, he sold Fender to CBS for a staggering $13.2 million. That was around $2 million more than CBS had paid to buy the New York Yankees a couple of years earlier. Mind-blowing. Leo stayed on at Fender as a consultant, but was faced with a clause that restricted him from competing with CBS until 1975. Instead, he formed Trisonics Inc. in 1972 with two former Fender salesmen, Forrest White and Tom Walker. The name soon changed to Musitech and then to Musicman. And as his non-compete with CBS expired, Leo's silent partner status came to an end and he came out of retirement to head the Musicman company in 1975. Leo then went on to design a number of guitars, basses and amps for Musicman, including, you've got it, the legendary Musicman Stingray in 1976. Like Leo's previous bass exploits with Fender, the Stingray is quite rightly considered a classic. Launched at the time when Fender basses were still dominating the market, the Stingray's active electronics and drive-in bass sound struck a chord with bassists all over the world, with the likes of Louis Johnson, Pilo Panadino, Tony Levin, Bernard Edwards and Flea all getting on board. Here's Louis Johnson giving the people of LA a masterclass in slap bass, August 22nd, 1981. When Leo's relations with Musicman soured in the late 70s, he recruited two old friends from Fender's early years, George Fullerton and Dale Hyatt, to form G&L Musical Products. In fact, Leo is the L in G&L. The new company allowed Leo to continue operations outside of his contractual obligations to Musicman, which eventually sold to Ernie Ball in 1984. Here's a sneak peek at Leo's office at G&L, exactly as he left it.
This is a great room to be in to kind of get your head around Leo Fender just as an inventor, as a person driven by this need to create something. And you know, you look at the tools that he used. He wasn't into trying to impress anybody with really, you know, look at the exotic things that I'm doing or just to try to impress anybody. He was a very practical man. Like, I'm trying to accomplish something. What is the most elegant, simple, way to do this.
Leo wanted to actually step away from his landmark Fender and Musicman basses and came up with some great new models for G&L. Staying true to his character, Leo worked right up until the day before his death, on March 21st, 1991, leaving BBE Sound to take over the management of G&L. He died aged 81 after battling Parkinson's disease. In this interview with Cosmo Music, Leo's second wife Phyllis and Randall Bell talk about Leo's unwavering work ethic.
Whatever he was working on or thinking about or deciding to do, he put a lot of thought into something. He didn't jump into something all of a sudden.
Right.
He worked on it and thought on it and slept on it, and he wanted the best.
Mm-hmm.
He really wanted the best, and not for himself.
Right.
Look, the world.
Now, if you have never played or owned a Fender bass, you simply have to. You cannot ignore such a significant legacy of live and recorded music. Guys, if you have enjoyed this video essay, please let me know in the comments who you'd like to feature next. Is it a bass player? Is it a bass manufacturer? Is it a band? Is it anything in between? Let me know in the comments. And obviously, make sure you are subscribed to this channel, so next time we release one of these bad boys, you get notified. If you want to become a better player on the bass and take your bass playing to the next level, go over to scottsbasslessons.com. It is the #1 online school for bass players like yourself. Other than that, guys, take it easy, and as always, I'll see you in the shed.